We're looking tonight, Leviticus chapters 20 and 21. We are pairing this section of the text with, as we talked about before, last time we had a chance to talk together a couple weeks ago, we discussed chapters 8, 9, and 10, which in Leviticus pairs with chapters 21 and 22 because they center on the priesthood. 8, 9, and 10. 8 is sort of Moses' installation of the Aaronic priesthood. 9 is sort of day one of that priesthood. They go through the ceremony themselves. And then chapter 10 is, of course, Nadab and Abihu and sort of the fallout from that. 21 and 22 tell us, it gives us the most details about the specific restrictions for the Aaronic priesthood. It gives us an idea of what their life was like and the types of considerations they had to make. Okay, so we're going to think about that tonight. Let's offer a word of prayer, and then we'll dive in there. Our God and our Father, we approach you tonight thankful for opportunity to gather together. Father, we're mindful of those who are sick in our number. We are experiencing the usual influx of illness that happens this time of year. Father, you are faithful to us. You have given us the ability to recover from things. You've given us the ability to care for one another when we are sick. Thank you for that. Father, thank you for the forgiveness that you give us through Jesus. Father, you have cured us of the most serious ailment we all experience, and we all choose, unfortunately. Thank you for what you did for us through Jesus. If all else, Father, you forgive us of our sins, all the rest will fall into place. Lord, thank you for the chance to be here. Thank you for the text we're about to study this evening as we can think more about the class and the clan that you chose among Israel to be your priests. Thank you for showing us in their lives and in what you would have them do principles that we can live by even today. Thank you, Father, for what you did again through Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. All right. Like we said, that's what we're looking at tonight. All right, before we dive into the text again, I wanted to review this picture. I don't even remember now what book this came from, one of my commentaries on Leviticus. But I thought it was the most simple and clean way of trying to understand when Leviticus talks about things like holy, clean, and unclean. These were the three states that a person or a thing could be in. That which is holy, of course, most holy is that which applies to God. The holy is that which has been sanctified but can still be accessed by people who are clean. Clean is kind of where everybody tried to live day to day, right? You didn't have to be holy per se in terms of like the priesthood if you were an average Israelite, but you had to be clean. You had to be in that middle sort of category. What you were not allowed to do is stay in an unclean state. Now, there were things that made you unclean, things that were unavoidable. It's a constant process of sort of being cleansed to coming back to being clean. Okay, it's something to remember. A few things. Just because something was clean does not make it holy, right? For example, if you go look through the food laws, there were things they were permitted to eat, like scaled fish and venison and other things like that, certain birds. But none of them were authorized for sacrifice. There were things that God said, this is clean to you, but even among the clean things, there was a much smaller subset where God says, okay, now these can be offered in sacrifice. These things can be brought forward into the holy, right? Like the rams and the lambs and so on, okay? Just because it was clean did not make it holy. Secondly, uncleanness itself was not sinful. First of all, because a lot of it was involuntary, right? Just dealing with relatives who had deceased, dealing with skin infections, procreation, and everything that goes into that. Both the beginning of the process and the end, right, are just unavoidable for life to continue. And so uncleanness itself was not sinful unless God said it was, in the case of the priests that we're going to talk about tonight. In some contexts, the priests were forbidden from becoming unclean in certain ways. That would have been sinful because it was a violation of God's law. Simply being unclean wasn't itself sinful. What you were never allowed to do, and this is why I like this chart so much, you were never allowed to take things from one extreme and make them contact the other extreme. under any circumstance, right? That which was holy could never come in contact with that which is unclean. There would be no way or no shape, form, or fashion would that ever happen. Or could you take something from the middle category, the clean, and bring it into the holy without permission? Right? So that's sort of the dynamic we're working with when you think through those things. Yeah, the penalty in both cases was death. Right? Burning incense was an approved activity by priests. Not in Leviticus 10, when they were told nothing about burning incense, they damned by you do it, and they die, right? Anytime that uncleanness came into contact with that which is holy, whoever brought it died. We're going to see some of that, I think, in tonight's text. One last thing. If you want to go from unclean to clean to holy, you couldn't skip the step in the middle. For someone who is unclean, before they go before God who is holy, they had to become clean, and then once they are clean, with permission, they could enter that next area. Right? So this is sort of a constant running process. It's different for us. One thing, too, that word profane, I think in the Hebrew it's hallel. It means to pollute, defile, profane, or to begin something, which is actually a weird meaning for that. Our English word for that means taking something that's unholy into something that's holy. Right? The word comes from the Latin profanus, pro before, and fanum is temple. Right? So you think profane means the space before you go into the temple. Right? If you were approaching a holy space, the area in front of it that was unholy is considered profane before you go in. And it became mean something that's unclean going into a place that's clean or that's holy. So anyway, good root word for that.
Kyle,
Yeah.
you said you could take clean into holy with permission.
With permission.
Would it not have to be sanctified first?
That's part of the permission.
That's the permission.
That's the permission process. God would say, you can come in. Well, give you an idea. Here's what I mean. Look at Leviticus, just the first verse of Leviticus. This is part of it, right? This is part of what I mean by permission. I'm sorry, not there. It's Leviticus 16, I'm sorry. The first verse of Leviticus 16. This is what we mean by permission, the Day of Atonement ceremony. Leviticus 16:1, the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron when they drew near before the Lord and died. That's an important bit of context, because what did they do? They tried to come into the holy unauthorized, or with an unauthorized activity, or they didn't meet what God told them to do. So they died. Verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat that's on the ark, so that he may not die. That's the baseline rule for Aaron and for any high priest. You don't come in. But then what do you see in verse 3, or the rest of verse 3? But in this way, Aaron shall come into the holy place. Right? So the standing order was, nobody goes in the most holy place unless you meet the criteria he's fixing to lay out for you. Right? So that's what I mean by permission. Right? The standing rule is, you don't go in where God is, or his holy area, unless you're given instructions how far, what, when, all those sorts of things. That's the best way I know to sort of explain that. Okay, tell me about this. You've had hopefully a chance to look at these two chapters. Short reading tonight, so thankful for that. According to the text, why were the priests subject to stricter rules than the average Israelite? According to what it says in Leviticus 21.
They came in contact with God.
Okay. Did you wave at David or no?
Basically the same thing.
All right. What do you think?
Yeah, they were going to be in the holy place, the most holy place.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Leviticus 21, God attaches an activity to what they're doing. Right? They'll be holy. They don't profane the name of God. What's the activity that's given? Kind of tells us why they're there. What's that?
Presenting the fire offerings.
The offerings, right? I like 21 and verse 6. They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God, for they offer the Lord's food offerings, the bread of their God, therefore they shall be holy. It's that language of I'm bringing offering to a deity, but I'm also bringing food into a home. right? Sort of those two get kind of smashed together in that phrase. They had to be holy because they were going into an area that average Israelites didn't go. The average Israelite didn't go into the holy place. They did. So because of that, stricter requirements are in play. Yep.
This is kind of random, and I don't want to get too far off the rails here, but we know throughout Israel's history they were, there was, they would move away, they would come closer, they would move away.
In terms of relationship with God?
Yeah,
Yes.
relationship, yeah.
Okay.
When we're in the New Testament period, what we're reading about, especially where were the priests at? Were most of the priests doing this well? Were they doing it incredibly poorly? I mean,
I would say that in the Second Temple period, right, after they returned from exile, they were more careful about the law than at any other point in their history. Would be my argument. The Israelites don't struggle with idolatry post-exile. It's just not around. A few decades in exile and losing your homeland and watching the temple burn will do that for you. Right? It'll straighten you out in terms of Baal worship. Now, they weren't righteous, of course. They were still flawed deeply and had lots of issues. Tradition had run rampant. But you're talking to a group of people that said, you can't even pick grain on the side of the road on Saturday because that counts as work. Now, take that and go to the temple and think about what they would be doing. I mean, to the nth degree. There's a scene, I don't know if there's any historical backing for this, but there's a scene in The Chosen where some of the characters bring oil to the temple, anointing oil, and the people involved have to promise beyond all promises that this oil is holy and that it's been done the right way, and if not, there's legal documents being filled out, and it's a process because they were so concerned about this, right? About not transgressing the holy. Now, did they go overboard? I don't know that you can when dealing with this. Now, binding traditions where they don't need to be bound, other things, yeah. My argument would be they were as careful as they'd ever been at that stage. All right, anything else you want to add on this section? There's one other reason that's given in here, right? It says they shall be holy. What does it say that God does to them in chapter 21? And in 22, actually. It says it a few times.
Talking about the statement in verse 8, I, the Lord, who sanctify you?
Yes, and it happens a few times. I think it happens in verse 8, verse 15, verse 23, 22, verse 2. I'm sorry, not verse 2, verse 9, verse 16, over and over and over again, right? I sanctify you, right? I have chosen you, I have separated you, I have made you holy. So you are going to have to live accordingly, okay? So we see that sort of that back and forth between them. Okay, did you notice any similarities between the priests and the sacrifices in between the two chapters? This is one of my very favorite sections because it's fascinating to see this part. All right, yeah.
It's the physical defect section about both the priests and the animals. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and among other things, but yes, that's one of them. So give me the short version of that.
Unblemished, no rash, no broken bones, no crushed testicle,
Right.
Rash scabs, eye defects, hunchback dwarves, broken foot, broken hand, lame, blind, probably others that I skipped.
Right. And it was almost the exact same list for the priest as it was for the animal. Somebody else did this. I didn't catch this, but someone else caught this. And I think they're right. I need to make sure. But they said the number of requirements is the same too. Like the same number of physical things are said about the priest as they are about the sacrifices. Right? So if you were to ask the question, which did God care more about? That the priests were holy or that the sacrifices were holy? The answer is yes, because he cared equally about both, right? He cared just as much and as deeply that those who offered the worship were as pure as what they offered, right? And you can see where it would be easy for a people who aren't informed as well as the Israelites were in this law to really go to either direction on that scale. right? You could tend to the side of, well, my sacrifice is great, but I can be a reprobate. I can do whatever, right? Or you can say, well, I am perfectly symbolically clean. Yeah, I can offer what I want. God doesn't do that. He wants both, right? He wants physical, I won't say perfection, but physical, not adequacy either. Purity, cleanliness, right? Along with that for his offering. Any other connections you notice between the two, between the sacrifices and the offerings themselves? Yeah.
This one just struck me, and I don't know where you would go with it, and I don't know if it's really what you're asking specifically, but in Leviticus 22 and 27 through 28, basically a newborn animal, calf, sheep, goat, could be offered, but it had to wait until the 8th day. But the thing that kind of struck me, in verse 28, it says, do not kill both her and her young on the same day. And the thing that came to my mind was Jeremiah there at in 52, when the destruction of Jerusalem is culminated and Zedekiah is taken away, his sons are killed before him, and then his eyes are put out. And to me, it shows a tenderness. Now, whether those two animals would understand what's going on,
Right.
but for him to say that just made me think of the tenderness of God.
It is an odd law, specifically verse 28, the not killing the sheep or the young in the one day. I don't have any, I might say I never have any great revelations here, but I don't have any insight on that one.
Well, it just struck me.
Other than just to say God did not allow mother and child to die at the same time. Even if sacrifice is going to be offered, there are still standards. Now, the 8th day thing should ring a bell. Someone else had to wait till the 8th day, too. Circumcision, right? So again, there's a connection between the offering and the Israelite, right? No priest could be circumcised before the 8th day, and no offering could be offered before the 8th day either. So I think there's an intentional connection there. Because you think about it, what difference does it make if it's 7 days or 9 days to an animal? Almost none, right? But there's a deliberate connection made with choosing that same day. Yeah.
You were talking about like the difference between holy and clean. We see that earlier with the priest's daughter.
Yes.
When she's in the house, she can eat of the sacrifice. But if she marries someone who's not a priest,
Yes.
she no longer can.
Yes. And she cannot eat of, what sort of food does it describe there?
Basically what's been sacrificed is the priest's portion.
Right. The bread is holy if it's for the priests, right? 21 and verse 22, he may eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and of the holy things. So even what the priests are given to eat is holy. And so back to our chart, if a young lady leaves the holy group, you might say, the priests, and marries into someone that's clean, one of the other tribes, well and good. She can eat, she can go do her thing, she can do whatever. She's not allowed to traipse back over here and eat what belongs to the priest anymore. Right? Because again, she's separated. If that relationship ends and she has to go home, she's with the priest, they are holy, now she can eat the holy thing. Right? There's a lot of distinguishing points between those two. When you're reading through that, and then you remember, like earlier in Leviticus, it describes having to give offerings because you happened to eat something that was holy. That wouldn't have been an everyday thing, but it would have been more common than you would think. Right, to have accidentally crossed over into that area and eaten something you weren't supposed to inadvertently. That would have happened. Okay, how does the text emphasize kindness and consideration alongside his holiness? I think Julian highlighted one of those a minute ago. The very, it would seem, inconsequential law about the mother and the child not being offered on the same day, but at the very least there's kindness there, right? What else did you see in those categories in this text? One of them we've kind of already talked about. Yeah.
Another one you addressed with having a provision if you accidentally ate something you shouldn't.
Yes.
And the third, I think about having just a provision for death of a family member. You know, just taking through the practicalities of that.
Yeah.
That meant.
Yeah, God recognized that those sorts of things happened, and there were, like you said, provision made for that. The one that sticks out was the one I actually just mentioned about the daughter of a priest who marries outside, but then for whatever reason has to come back home. Right? That's a provision where God says, okay, well, you're not provided for here anymore, so when you go home, you can continue to be provided for there. Right? That's a very gracious thing to do, to take a woman who had, maybe for good reasons, married outside the Levites, and comes home, and she's still able to be provided for. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, Corey brought it up already, the fail case in verse 14 of if you accidentally ate. But to me, when I was reading this part, that stood out to me in stark contrast to Aaron's son's event. I mean, so you think, I know they're not back to back, but if you were thinking about them back to back, I mean, you have what seems unyielding, you can't make a mistake,
Right.
and you instantly die,
Right.
and then this of God. Obviously, those two things aren't the same, but that God is aware that the people He has chosen are human and make mistakes.
Right.
So if it was I didn't realize what I was doing moment, you can fix it. It's fine.
Right, right. It's a good example of God being gracious to something that you might say is minor. It's part of the law, so it counts and it's important, but it's different from those two guys offering incense, right, unauthorized way. It's nice to see like chapters 8, 9, and 10 and how God's depicted there in this section. You get a better picture. Any other sections really emphasize that God's being kind and considerate to people here? I'll bring up one more if you don't.
Well, the one thing that always struck me is God is considerate, this is just in general with the sacrifices, if you don't have a lot of money, you can
Right.
have a lesser offering, if you will, a cheaper offering or a less expensive offering. And I always thought that was interesting because, an uncaring God could say, you have to have the bull, end of discussion. And these people down here haven't owned a bull in their entire life. They'd be stuck.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of consideration, I guess.
Certainly. Yep.
Were you thinking about the fact that if you had a defect, you couldn't serve, but you could still eat?
Yep. Very into chapter 21. It for me is one of the better examples of this. It would have been, like Bob said a minute ago, if God would have said, well, you have to have a bull or else, that's just the way it is. It could have very easily read something like, listen, if you got a defect, you're out, right? Go live with some other tribe, or go be a leper, or go do something else, right? Because you're not fit to be here, so, skedaddle. He doesn't say that, right? Even those who cannot serve as priests because of things that are completely outside their control. Well, I will either outside their control or as a result of their own stupidity. You know anybody that hurt themselves, maimed themselves permanently for a long? Yeah, right? Like some of the things in this list you could have done to yourself or had someone, earned it somehow. Even if that's the case, verse 22 in chapter 21, He may eat the bread of His God. He is still provided for. He still has a role. There are still things, He wouldn't have just sat on His hands. There would have been other things He could have done, right? Just because of the circumstance, wasn't allowed to go in and serve in that way. So there is kindness and consideration even there. In today's world, you read a passage like that out loud, and everyone throws a fit. They say, well, God is horrible. God is this cruel tyrant. No, He's not. He's holy is what He is, right? We have no sense of that. So our culture has no sense of why this has to be, right?
Well, especially when you think about all the other cultures of even much more recent times than, 4,000 years ago.
Yes.
The defect meant you were left outside to die of exposure.
Right.
Like, they're very different things.
Right. Spartan culture, right? If you had a defect, they threw you off the cliff. What was the highest ideal to that culture? Military ability, right? The ability to fight and engage war. And if you weren't about that, you were out. What is the highest thing in this society? The holiness of God, the separate and awesome nature of God. So everything is devoted to that, right? So even things that were outside the control of someone and they get maimed or blemished somehow, you're still provided for because he's gracious. But he's still holy, and he's going to defend that holiness.
You know, as you were saying that, I was just looking at this again, and God says, I sanctify them.
Yes.
So he's not going to allow a lesser, quote unquote, lesser person to be involved in it because it takes away from the
Yes.
whole process,
Yes.
right?
It detracts from what the
It's
point's
not
being
because
made.
he's angry with the person, it's just, this process is not up to my standards anymore.
Yeah, there are scenarios when God just chooses, this is the person I want, and that's the way it's going to be. I'm thinking about Acts chapter 1. There were 2 men offered up as replacement apostles. One is chosen. What about the other guy? He's not a bad person, he just wasn't fit, right? Not his fault. All right, I sort of answered this already. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
The thing I think is kind of interesting is it allows retirement from the job
Yes,
gracefully. Okay, when men get older, sometimes they lose hair, sometimes they get arthritis, sometimes, you know what I mean?
yeah, well, yes,
You couldn't serve if you were bald.
yes.
And, you know, you get arthritis, so there's probably, about the time you were 50 or 55, you were probably looking at some retirement.
Yeah, there would have been some medical reasons to retire, we might call them today. Noteworthy, they weren't allowed to work past 50 anyway.
Oh, really?
They retired at 50. Numbers, I can't remember the chapter. It's Numbers 13. I don't remember. But there was it's Numbers 8, the last few verses of Numbers 8. All of the Levites served from 25 to 50, basically. I would probably exclude the high priest from that. That was a lifetime. That was a lifetime gig. But for Levites in general, 25 to 50. Was it sinful for a priest to become unclean?
No.
Generally, no.
Part of his job would be, well, the high priest.
Generally, no, but there were some specifics, right? There were some things they weren't allowed to become unclean with. But just could they become unclean? Well, guess what? Now there's no having children, right? No priesthood after a generation. It would have happened. But for the priest and the high priest, there were specific things they were not allowed to be unclean with.
Was Zechariah, John the Baptist's dad, he went in and he was an old guy.
Yes.
So was he the high priest at the time?
That I don't think so.
Because they said they were old when they had him. I assume
Right.
They were like 80 or 90.
That would be a good question. I need to look at that. I don't remember off the top of my head if it distinguishes between priests and Levites, but I will find out. All right, I'll look for it. That is a good point. I'd forgotten about Zechariah. All right, so no, priests are not sinful to become unclean generally, but there were some specifics. What was the penalty for violating God's holiness in any way? Death. Yeah.
Can I throw in a different one? Because this was where a priest's daughter played the role of a harlot.
Mm-hmm.
She shall be burned with fire.
Yes.
Is that like thrown in, the trash bin and burned up like Molech? Or?
Most people think she was probably stoned first, and then they would burn the body.
Because if you look at the reference, it mentions stoning, but this says she shall be burned with fire. So
Yes.
they're saying probably stoned and then thrown in the...
Yes, and most people think the idea behind burning the body was absolutely removing all traces of the impurity. The person doesn't even get honorable burial because of the depth of their uncleanness. The only way to get rid of it is to burn it up completely. Noteworthy, that's also what's done to sin offerings, right? They are burned completely. Why? Sin's associated with it, right? So it's the same idea. She's not an offering, but it's the same thought process, I think, right? To get rid of the contamination. You violate God's holiness, you die. That is what happened, right? And you can see that a couple times in chapter. Okay, how are cleanness and uncleanness transmitted? That's sort of a trick question. Only half of it's legit. How is uncleanness transmitted in Israel? You touch things.
Yeah.
Right.
You were unclean, you touched someone, you could make them unclean.
Pretty advanced form of not germ science, but I don't know what the word for germ science is. See, I've run at the end of my knowledge. Ask Mark. He'll be here.
Where's Mark when you need him?
Yeah, where's Mark when you need him? But yeah, uncleanness is transmitted by touch, right? Something touches something and it becomes unclean. What about cleanness? Cleanness is not transferred, right? Cleanness is accomplished on an object or on a person, for a person. But there is no take a clean thing and touch an unclean thing and it transfers, right? I say there's no, but there actually is one place where this happens. When you see it, it's kind of neat. Look at Isaiah chapter 6, if you got a Bible. Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah has his vision of God, right? The train of his robe fills the temple. Remember Isaiah, he says, "Woe is me, for I'm lost," Isaiah 6 and verse 5. Isaiah 6 and verse 6, one of the seraphim flew to him, having in his hand a burning coal he had taken with tongs from the altar. Is that a clean or an unclean object? It's a clean object because it's from the altar, right? He touches Isaiah's lips and says, "Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, your sins atoned for." What happened? Isaiah became clean. He was made clean by contact, right? That is so backwards from the way it worked in Israel, right? That a clean thing was so powerful as to contact something and make it clean. I know you've heard that story before.
I've interpreted this one, though, purification comes by fire.
Yes.
And so fire was applied
Yes.
to purify.
Yes. So something, that idea of it being pure and then contacting someone who's unclean, they're made clean. You ever heard that story before? It's called Jesus of Nazareth, because what did he do repeatedly in his life? He touches people in things that are unclean, and they get better. They become clean. Right? They become healed. Maybe a reference to that. Anyway, yeah, Jesus does what the law could not. He touches things to make them clean, whereas it was usually the other way around.
And then not to get ahead of this, but we come in contact with his blood, and it makes us.
Same idea, the same thought process. That's exactly right. Okay, we talked about a few things. Here's some more stuff to notice in the couple of chapters. When you read the Bible, try to notice when things are repeated over and over and over. It said repeatedly in this section either some version of "I am the Lord," right, or "I am Yahweh," would be the best way to say that, or "I am Yahweh who sanctifies them." I didn't even put all the references up there. I just put 3 or 4. Repeatedly, God says a thing and he just says, "I am the Lord." Why does he keep doing that? Why just say a thing and then say, "I am the Lord"?
Because he's describing all the rules, and so that's his authority to give the rules.
Yeah, this is why you're doing this. It's like, why do I have to? Because I said so, right? Why do I? Because I am the Lord. That's reason enough, right? What may have worked with some effectiveness with your parents worked with absolute effectiveness with God, right? Because he had the authority to just say, "I am God," and that was that, or should have been that, right? Yeah.
And if you think about it, these are things that don't have to make sense to us. It doesn't have to make sense to us that the bull is clean and the deer isn't. The fact that God said it is a good enough reason.
It is.
We don't have to figure out why.
It is.
And sometimes we get stuck doing that. Well, why did God say this?
It is helpful to know why, and I
Yeah.
think we can figure out why in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are some, like the passage Julian brought up. Why can't the animal and its child be killed on the same day? I don't know. And there are other laws like that where you just say, "We don't know, but he said so,"
Yeah.
and that's where we have to quit. I mentioned the bread of his God thing already. That happens a few times in this text. Something that's cool at the very end of this. If you ask you the question, who sanctified who? Read the last 2 verses of chapter 22 or the last 3 verses. And tell me who's sanctifying who. Because verse 32 says, "You shall not profane my holy name, that I may be sanctified among the people of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you." So who done it? Israel or God? Kind of like our earlier answer, right? Does God care about the worshiper or the sacrifice? Yes.
Yes.
Who's doing the sanctifying? They both are. One of the better ways, I think, to think about sanctifying, it means, I put it up here, to draw something toward holiness, to bring it to that place of holiness. In God's case, He was drawing His people near to Him, right? You see that in chapter 19 and chapter 18 in Exodus. He came to live among them, to draw them near to Himself. And so what was Israel expected to do? Same thing, right? You ever heard a phrase along those lines, draw near to me and I'll draw near to you? That concept? I think that's what's being described here at the end of the chapter. There is I've drawn you near to me, so you need to do that too, right? We both need to, it's not meeting in the middle, it's working toward the same end, which is relationship, being together again.
But the people really aren't working anything on God.
No,
Just-
they're not
just
affecting His
doing
holiness.
what God told them to do,
Yeah.
not profaning.
Yeah.
If they stay in that condition, then God is able to sanctify them.
Yeah, they are not affecting His holiness. But you might think of it as in terms of their knowledge of Him and their relationship with Him. That is getting closer and closer to what it truly is, right? And at the same time, God is, might say, pulling on the rope, right? A good way to think about it. He's drawing them closer to Himself.
Is it fair to say that if we are saints, meaning we are sanctified, then we, looking at God, have to sanctify Him. We have to set Him apart.
Yes.
God
Yes.
can't be normal. He can't be regular.
Yes.
He's God and He's only God.
Yep.
Because of that, we have set Him apart from everything else in our life. He's better.
Yep. Both are happening.
Yeah.
Right. You might remember Jesus said something interesting. He says, when I am lifted up, I will what? I will draw all men to myself. That same attitude of what God's describing here, of I will bring them closer to me. Right. It's a beautiful thought. We talked about this. The God who takes care of those who are dealing with the effects of sin in the world. You go down and look through the mutilated list, you're like, oh yeah, these are the things that happen in a world full of sin. Right? The world of Adam and Eve, pre, knowledge of good and evil, didn't have all this. They're living in a broken world, and God understands that. And He allows for even those who are supposed to serve Him, who have been affected by that broken world, to still be provided for and cared for and taken care of. But at the same time, He will not allow that into the place where He is. Right? He will not allow that which kind of symbolizes sin to come into the place. I talked about this a minute ago. 21, the section on mutilation. It sounds cruel to us, but there's a few things to remember. The greatest of all physical blemishes came from sin. Right? Derived from sin. And everything that's close to that, leading up to that, right, is biblically, it's associated with sin. A lot of the curses of the covenant, the curses for forsaking God and going into sin, involved the same things mentioned in this chapter, right? Scabs and itch, and all those physical sorts of mutilations. For the Israelite, those things meant sin. Right? Remember the question they asked Jesus about the man born blind? What was the question? Who sinned, this man or his parents? Where'd they get that from? Because the law taught them physical sickness, ailments, those things are tied to sin. Often they're the punishment for sin in the national sense, and even with like individuals like Gehazi, right? Elijah's servant. He goes and tries to, and he's struck with leprosy. Miriam is struck with leprosy because she sinned, right? That association is clear. I put that one on the next one, right? Miriam and Gehazi both struck with leprosy. If the tabernacle represents Eden, which I think it does, it's the reason why there's pomegranates everywhere, and trees, and cherubim, right, embroidered into things, then you can't allow anything in there that represents sin, right? So while the deformities were maybe innocent, you didn't have a choice in it, it represented something that would never be in God's presence, which is sin. Right? So to 21st century ears, it sounds cruel The Israelite ears, it makes sense. Because those were the associations they would have formed in their mind.
Well, those would have been the standards that God had, and he
Right.
wouldn't lessen them.
Right. And those standards they weren't just made willy-nilly. They were made with purpose, right? With concrete things you could attach to them, right? It's one thing you can appreciate about God is he tells his people what to do, and then he explains to them why, one way or the other, right? Whether they would have known it then or would have come to understand it later. Yeah, so the priests represented the people, or God before the people too. There's the other side of this. They were the ones closest to him. And so the imagery of a holy, sanctified priest of God bearing the mark of physical sin, or bearing physically the mark of sin, doesn't jive, right? Those things don't go together. We mentioned this already. The worship and the worshipers have to be without blemish. To me, acceptability is the central question of their worship. That's the only question that matters in Israelite worship. Will God take this or not? Will he be pleased with this or not? All the rest of it is details. Will God accept this or not? Which, if you think back, that goes back to the original worship offered in the Bible. Right? What was the problem between Cain and Abel's sacrifices? God accepted one of them and he didn't accept the other one. And there were reasons for that, and we can speculate about what those were. But that is still the question in Leviticus. Right? Will God accept this? And from either the sacrificer or the sacrifice, it's about whether or not he will accept it, not whether or not we think it's good enough or whether or not we think it's good. Right? That's the key question. And I think that's probably still the key question today, right? How many people really genuinely consider this in the religious world? Not, do I like this, but does he? Right? How much of worship has just become a concert because you haven't noticed we like concerts, right? We like motivational speakers. We like magic. We like, other things. But does he like it? Right? That's lost in a lot of our world. And I hope not with us. That's our big question. Other things you noticed in the text, stuff to mention? Yeah.
Kind of going down this path as well. Like, I know in previous classes we talked about not what to wear to worship, but kind of the standards that we have set for ourselves. And what I think about whenever we're talking about sacrifices and stuff, because that's kind of similar in my mind. You can wear sweatpants, you can wear pajamas, they could eat the fish, they could eat deer and everything, and it was okay. But there's a difference between church clothes and comfy clothes, you know what I mean? And so that was just I know probably that.
Yeah, you can be thoroughly modestly clothed in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, right? There's some people going, come on, please, make it happen. No. But you're right, but is that acceptable?
Right.
We haven't been given specific things, but clearly there's a way for us to tell. Right? Certain things are acceptable, some are not. Even now, if what I'm wearing is wrong, you have to blame mine. I came downstairs and I asked her, do you think this is good? And she goes, yeah. So, whatever you think, take it up with management. That's more true than you know. We've done a little bit of application tonight. We've talked about Jesus a little bit. We're going to do it more in earnest next week. Okay. Go back through the priestly sections, 8, 9, and 10, and then 21, 22, only 5 chapters. And then think about, okay, what can I draw from this for our application, and then how does this connect to Christ? Okay, because it connects to Christ a lot. I hope you hear this. All right, thank you guys. Oh, it is December 3rd, by the way, because next Wednesday night is New Song Practice. So 2 weeks.